There is a brutal truth that Machiavelli discovered 500 years ago that remains more relevant today than ever. Weakness is always punished, even when it masquerades as virtue. In a world where male performance has become an elaborate art, the ability to identify real weakness has become a strategic necessity. Every day you interact with men who project confidence, authority, and strength. But behind these carefully constructed masks lie invisible cues that instantly reveal who possesses real power and who is merely pretending to. The difference between appearing strong and actually being strong is abysmal. And those who recognize this difference have a devastating advantage. The inconvenient truth is this: male weakness doesn't hide in major failures or dramatic breakdowns. It reveals itself in micro-behaviors, in instinctive reactions, in subtle patterns that most people completely ignore, while others are being fooled by superficial performances. You may be reading the psychological reality behind the mask. Today, I'm going to teach you 3 specific behaviors that instantly expose male weakness. These aren't obvious signs that anyone can see. They're deep psychological patterns that only trained observers can identify. Once you master these identification tactics, you'll never again be fooled by displays of false strength. Prepare to see masculinity in a whole new way. And most importantly, prepare to identify these patterns in yourself and eliminate them permanently. The 3 behaviors of weakness behavior. 1. Over-justification. The insecurity protocol, the manifestation of behavior. The first behavior that instantly exposes weakness is something Machiavelli would call the protocol of insecurity, over-justification. Weak men can't simply make a decision, make a statement, or take a stand without immediately bombarding you with an avalanche of unnecessary explanations. Pay close attention. When a truly secure man says no to something, he simply says no. He may add a brief explanation if necessary, but the answer is direct, final, and comfortable. He doesn't feel the need to justify his decision for external validation. He doesn't need to convince you that his choice was correct. And he definitely isn't anxious about your reaction. A weak man, on the other hand, turns a simple refusal into a defensive monologue. I can't go today because, well, I have this meeting that's actually not that important. But I promised my boss I'd be there, and he's kind of waiting, although I could probably cancel. But I think that would be kind of irresponsible. And besides, my mom also said that. And so on. Ad nauseam. This avalanche of justifications reveals multiple weaknesses simultaneously. Fear of disapproval, need for external validation, lack of conviction in one's own decisions, and most devastating of all, the subconscious belief that one's choices need to be approved by others to be valid. Also notice how this over-justification manifests itself in casual conversations. Insecure men can't express an opinion without immediately building defensive fortifications around it. I think this movie was good. I mean, I know the critics didn't like it much, and maybe I have terrible taste in movies, but it worked for me. Although I understand why others might not like it. Compare this to how a confident man expresses the same opinion. I like the movie. Period. He doesn't need permission to have an opinion. He doesn't need to apologize for his tastes. And he's not asking for your approval to validate his experience. The depth psychology behind excessive justification is the direct result of fundamentally compromised psychological structure. At its deepest level, it reveals that people don't believe their decisions, opinions, or choices have intrinsic value. They operate from the premise that they constantly need to prove their worth and justify their existence to others. This dynamic often originates in childhood, where the child learned that their needs, desires, or opinions were only accepted when accompanied by valid justifications from adults. The result is an adult who's internalized the belief that they have no automatic right to their own preferences. Machiavelli understood that real power comes from the ability to make decisions without needing external approval. Those who constantly justify themselves are essentially conveying, I don't believe I have real authority over my own life, so I need to convince you that my choices are acceptable. This compulsive need for justification also reveals a fundamentally reactive mindset. Instead of operating from their own values and convictions, the weak man is constantly anticipating imaginary objections and trying to forestall disapproval. He lives in a state of perpetual defensiveness, which is the complete antithesis of genuine power. Even more devastating, over-justification often sabotages the very position you're trying to defend. When you offer 10 reasons for a decision that should be self-evident, you inadvertently suggest that there are problems with your choice that need to be addressed. You're essentially arguing against yourself. Men who master this dynamic know that true strength is communicated through simplicity and conviction, not through defensive elaboration. They understand that when you over-justify yourself, you are implicitly asking for permission to exist. And that is a fundamentally weak position. The strategic application. Once you identify this pattern in someone, you immediately understand that you're dealing with a person who can be easily manipulated by withdrawing approval or creating social pressure. Men who need to justify everything are vulnerable to anyone who questions their decisions because they lack the inner conviction to withstand external pressure. You can also use this information to position yourself as a natural authority. When you respond to their excessive justifications with simple acceptance or direct questions, you automatically assume a position of power in the dynamic because they're seeking your validation. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, the cure is simple but not easy. Start practicing direct statements without unnecessary justifications. When someone questions your decisions, resist the urge to defend yourself and simply restate your position. The initial discomfort you'll feel is a sign that you're breaking deeply ingrained patterns of weakness. 2. Weaponize kindness. The pseudo-altruists. Arsenal the manifestation of behavior. The second behavior that instantly reveals male weakness is what Machiavelli would identify as weaponized kindness. The calculated use of kindness as a tool of manipulation and control. Weak men often masquerade as extraordinarily kind, generous, and altruistic. But careful analysis reveals that their kindness always comes with strings attached. Notice the pattern. A weak man will be overly helpful, constantly offering favors, always available to help, seemingly without expecting anything in return. On the surface, this seems admirable, but pay attention to what happens when his generosity goes unrecognized. When his favors are not reciprocated, or when someone sets clear boundaries with him, the mask slips immediately. Suddenly, you discover that all that kindness was actually an investment he expected to yield specific dividends. He becomes resentful, passive-aggressive, or openly hostile. Phrases like, "After everything I've done for you, or "I've always been there for you, but when I need you, start to appear. This isn't genuine kindness. It's sophisticated emotional manipulation. The weak man uses generosity as a way to create emotional debt, hoping his kindness will protect him from rejection, criticism, or abandonment. It's a control strategy disguised as virtue. Also note how these men often position themselves as saviors or nice guys who are constantly misunderstood or mistreated by ungrateful people. They construct narratives in which they are perpetually victimized by people who take advantage of their natural kindness, when in reality, they are trying to buy loyalty and affection through favors. A classic example is the man who constantly offers financial help, gifts, or practical support to women, but becomes bitter and resentful when those women don't reciprocate romantically. He's never been explicit about his romantic intentions, but he's built up an internal expectation that his generosity will be rewarded with romantic interest. Another common pattern is the man who becomes indispensable in social or professional groups through his constant availability and excessive helpfulness, but uses this position to exert subtle influence and control. He becomes the guy who always helps everyone, but if you observe carefully, you'll see that he uses this reputation as social leverage. The depth psychology behind weaponized kindness emerges from a deep insecurity about intrinsic self-worth. The weak person doesn't believe they are naturally worthy of love. respect, or attention, so they try to buy these things through acts of generosity. It's a compensatory strategy based on the fundamental belief that being themselves isn't enough. This dynamic reveals a transactional mindset toward human relationships. Rather than building connections based on mutual compatibility, genuine respect, or enjoyment of each other's company, it operates from the premise that relationships are essentially contracts where kindness is exchanged for loyalty. Machiavelli would understand this as a disguised form of coercive power. The weak man cannot inspire loyalty through charisma, competence, or genuine leadership, so he tries to create obligations through favors. It is an attempt to control others through guilt and social debt. The most insidious aspect of this strategy is how it allows a man to maintain a positive self-image while engaging in fundamentally manipulative behavior. He may see himself as generous and altruistic, when in reality, he's being calculating and controlling. This cognitive dissonance protects him from confronting his own weakness and manipulation. Genuine kindness, in contrast, doesn't expect specific reciprocation. It emerges from inner abundance, not need. A genuinely strong person can be generous without creating expectations, can help without keeping a mental ledger of favors, and can accept when his help is refused without becoming defensive or resentful. The strategic application. When you recognize this pattern, you immediately know you're dealing with someone trying to manipulate you through manufactured generosity. The strategic response is to maintain clear boundaries and never accept favors you haven't explicitly requested or that come with implicit expectations. You can test whether someone is weaponizing kindness by simply setting clear boundaries or declining some of their offers. If they react with resentment, defensiveness, or guilt-tripping, you've confirmed that the kindness was transactional, not genuine. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, healing requires an honest examination of your motivations. Start practicing generosity without specific expectations of reciprocation. Learn to tolerate the discomfort of being rejected or misunderstood without resorting to guilt or emotional manipulation. Develop inner value through competence, authenticity, and personal growth, rather than trying to buy validation through favors. Understand that genuine relationships are based on mutual attraction and compatibility, not on obligations created through calculated generosity. Behavior 3. Display addiction. The insecure. Peacock syndrome, the manifestation of behavior. The third behavior that instantly exposes male weakness is what Machiavelli would recognize as the insecure peacock syndrome, the compulsive need for display and external validation through exaggerated displays of success, wealth, or ability. Weak men cannot simply achieve. They must constantly advertise, exaggerate, and perform their accomplishments for an audience. Notice the pattern. This man can't mention a purchase without highlighting the price. Can't talk about work without making it obvious how much he earns. Can't tell a story without positioning himself as the smartest and most capable hero. Every conversation becomes an opportunity for subtle, or not so subtle, bragging. He turns casual interactions into personal marketing pitches. Oh, this watch. It was a gift I gave myself after I closed that 6-figure contract. Or, I had to use my Mercedes today because the Porsche is in for service. Notice how he always finds ways to insert information about material status into completely unrelated conversations. This display extends beyond material possessions to experiences, connections, and knowledge. He can't simply dine at a restaurant. It has to be that exclusive place where you have to know someone to get a table. He doesn't know people. He knows important people, whose names he constantly drops. The most telling pattern is how he reacts when others share successes. Instead of genuine celebration, you notice immediate competitiveness. If someone mentions a promotion, he quickly finds a way to mention his own career. If someone talks about a trip, he counters with an even better experience. He can't allow others to have their moment in the spotlight without trying to regain the spotlight. Also, notice his body language and energy when he's showing off versus when he's in normal conversation. During his status displays, he becomes more animated, speaks louder, and uses more gestures. It's as if he only comes alive when he's being admired or envied. A particularly revealing aspect is how he photographs and documents his life. His social media accounts are carefully curated museums of achievements, possessions, and experiences designed to impress. He doesn't live experiences. He performs experiences for public consumption. The depth psychology behind display addiction reveals a psychological structure fundamentally based on external validation. The weak man lacks a stable internal sense of self-worth, so he constantly relies on the admiration and envy of others to feel worthy. His successes only become real when they're recognized and validated by an audience. This compulsive need to display oneself emerges from a deep insecurity about intrinsic value. It operates from the belief that one is only as valuable as one's latest achievements or possessions, and that these achievements must be constantly displayed to maintain one's social status. Machiavelli would understand this as a fundamental form of weakness because it reveals a total dependence on external perceptions. A man who constantly needs to prove his worth is essentially admitting that he doesn't believe in his own value. He is perpetually in sales mode, trying to convince others and himself that he deserves respect and admiration. The devastating irony is that this constant display actually diminishes genuine respect. People intuitively recognize neediness, even when it's disguised as success. The need to display power often indicates an absence of real power. True power is quiet, confident, and doesn't need constant external validation. This syndrome also reveals a fundamentally competitive and insecure mindset toward other men. Instead of collaboration or genuine celebration of others' successes, he sees every interaction as a competition where he needs to establish dominance through one-upmanship. An addiction to display also indicates an unhealthy relationship with one's own achievements. Instead of internal satisfaction and quiet pride, one needs public applause for one's achievements to have meaning. This creates a vicious cycle where one always needs more achievements, bigger displays, and greater validation. The strategic application. When you identify this pattern, you immediately know you're dealing with someone deeply insecure, who can be easily manipulated through flattery or competition. Men addicted to showing off are vulnerable to anyone who can stroke their ego or challenge their status. You can use this information for controlled interactions where you need something from him. A little strategic admiration for his achievements can make him more compliant and eager to please. Alternatively, subtle questions about the authenticity of his claims can destabilize him completely. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, the cure requires developing genuine self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation. Start practicing by enjoying your successes privately before sharing them. Learn to celebrate others' achievements without immediately competing or comparing. Develop interests and achievements that you pursue purely for internal satisfaction, not to impress others. Practice being comfortable in conversations where you're not the center of attention. The discomfort you feel is a sign that you're breaking deeply rooted patterns of insecurity. Focus and building genuine competency character aims the building image. Understand true power attracts rather than promotes, influences rather than impresses. He commands respect through substance rather than showmanship. The mindset shift you now possess a skill that only the most astute observers develop. The ability to see through masculine performances and identify real weakness where others see apparent strength. But this isn't just a tool for evaluating others. It's a mirror for examining yourself. Most men operate in a state of self-deception, believing their masks of strength are genuine, failing to realize that their behaviors constantly convey insecurity to trained observers. They confuse performance with reality, appearance with substance. When you master these three behavioral identifications, you develop what I call an authenticity radar. You see not only who's feigning strength, but also who possesses genuine power. You distinguish between real confidence and performative confidence, between authentic leadership and compensatory authoritarianism. This awareness protects you from being influenced by men who project authority but operate from weakness. More importantly, it allows you to identify and eliminate these patterns in your own life before they sabotage your social and professional effectiveness. Remember, in a world full of men acting out toxic masculinity based on insecurity, the one who has developed genuine strength based on authenticity and real competence has a devastating advantage. You're not becoming manipulative. You're becoming impossible to fool. The mastery of art Machiavelli wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be. Few feel what you really are. Today, you have learned to be one of the few who can feel the reality behind appearances. The three behaviors we've discussed, over-justification, weaponize kindness, and display addiction, aren't just signs of weakness. They're psychological traps that keep men stuck in cycles of insecurity and neediness. When you can instantly identify them, you gain the ability to navigate social and professional interactions with complete clarity. But true mastery is using this knowledge to forge genuine strength within yourself. Eliminate the need to justify decisions you know are right. Practice generosity without expectations. Develop accomplishments you don't need to announce to feel proud. Real power is quiet, confident, and authentic. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't need to defend itself. And it definitely doesn't need the approval of others to exist. When you eliminate these three behaviors from your own life, you automatically become magnetic to people who value authenticity and threatening to those who operate through manipulation. In a world of artificial male performance, genuine authenticity is the ultimate competitive advantage. Which of these three behaviors do you recognize most in your life? And more importantly, which one do you need to eliminate from your own life? Leave a comment, and if this content changed your perspective on authentic masculine power, please like and subscribe, because real strength recognizes real strength.